This is the biggest concern that we have at the United Nations, this concentration of economic and tech power and the hubris that comes with it, which sometimes makes you do things that are risky.
Welcome to today's episode of the AI Futures podcast, where I'm delighted to have Undersecretary General Amandeep Gill with us, currently serving as the Special Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies. Time magazine recognized him in 2024 as one of the 100 most influential people in AI. Let me ask you what your expectations are from the India Impact Summit. What are you hoping can come of international cooperation and maybe even cooperation within the global south?
This is an important moment. The Secretary General would be leading the United Nations Delegation Summit. Exciting to see a comprehensive, optimistic agenda for the summit. The focus on bridging the AI divide, building AI capacity. I also like the focus on making AI more accessible to the common person in the street. One of the themes, the impact on children's mental health issues. We also need to look at cognitive decline, the impact on social relationships, etc. We may get very excited about the economic impact, but not realizing that the ground may be shifting from underneath us. I think Indian students in particular need to be careful about not getting bogged down in what is called ratta, rote learning. AI is going to kill that. There should be a massive focus on talent development.
It's a pleasure to have Undersecretary Gill with us. And so a really warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Anirudh. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the warm introduction. And please feel free to call me Amandeep.
Undersecretary Gill, what are some of the key high-level developments that you've seen in the world of AI that has kept you maybe busy, worried, or optimistic?
Thanks. I think that's a good question to start our conversation with. So the Paris Summit was billed as the AI Action Summit. So in a sense, the time for reflection had been there, but now we needed to move fast and act on the challenge and the opportunity from AI. And at the UN, since then, we've had some very positive developments. So let me speak about the positive side first. Member states came together in August of 2025, to endorse two new standing mechanisms for the global governance of AI. An international independent scientific panel of 40 global experts on AI, and a new global dialogue on AI governance, where all 193 member states of the UN will have a seat at the table in shaping the AI future. So these are tremendous historic developments for the United Nations and give the UN a central role in shaping international cooperation on the challenges and opportunities of AI. Alongside these two decisions, the member states had asked the Secretary General to come up with some options for bridging the AI divide. As you know, on top of the existing digital divide, for instance, 2.7 billion people are still not on the internet. We have a looming AI divide, access to chips. In Africa, all of Africa, less than 1,000 GPUs, which a single university in China. So the SG presented these options for AI capacity building, and some member states have picked up the gauntlet and started to respond with a UN-supported network of AI capacity building centers. So for us, these three areas of positive advance across science, policy, and capacity are very heartening. Now, obviously, there are some other developments which give us pause for reflection. I think the concentration of AI power continues to increase. So there is the inequality aspect of what AI brings in terms of opportunities. There's also the harm side. So We've seen, for instance, unfortunately, instances of suicide by teenagers who've been deluded into certain actions by interactions with AI chatbots. So some of the harms are becoming more visible. They became more visible in 2025. And alongside, we saw a fragmentation of the international effort on AI governance, the world going in different ways. And therefore, it's become more challenging for us to navigate the cross-border impact of AI, both in terms of benefit and risk.
I think lots of pieces in there to unpack. Let me pick up on the last piece first, which is, I think, as you're starting to refer to, the geopolitical fragmentation and contestation that we are seeing in the world that's maybe leading the world in different directions, and then as a result making efforts for global governance and international cooperation harder. If I may, so I'm a big history buff. If I may actually delve into history a little bit, the UN, of course, and the global governance institutions that we've seen over the last several decades really, of course, do great work also were developed at a time when, even though there was a Cold War type scenario emerging, right, in the late 40s in the post-World War II scenario, somehow cooperation was still achieved through organizations like the UN, right? Of course, with constraints here and there on certain aspects and others. But today, it seems a bit different, one. And second, technology, even though we have examples of, let's say, nuclear and space from that era also being real areas of contestation between the two major superpowers of the day, today it seems that technology has become a really core that contestation as well, right? So if I could ask you to maybe go back to that historical time and see how maybe global cooperation still, to a large extent, succeeded in many ways. And to today's time, do you find any lessons from that time that maybe we are ignoring today, where we seem to be today in a fairly bearish scenario as far as global cooperation is concerned? Any lessons from that time, the way you see it?
One big lesson from previous waves of technological advancements is that technology diffuses, it proliferates. And often we underestimate the rate of diffusion. There is this contradictory aspect to technology. On the one hand, concentration. On the other hand, diffusion and democratization. And the two proceed often in parallel. You saw that with nuclear technology, space technology. There's still concentration of that, but space technology, for example, has diffused quite a lot. The application, satellite fabrication, the use of satellite data, is now widely available. So I guess for AI as well, I believe some people are overestimating the benefits of concentration for themselves. So I think AI is going to diffuse. It is going to be developed in different contexts, in different ways. There will be concentration. There will be some who will get left behind, unfortunately, and we have to think seriously about that challenge. But AI will diffuse rapidly. And then again, in terms of cooperation around standards, around guardrails, around facilitation even of the opportunities. Let's say, if you have liability issues in different markets and you don't have common templates to address them, as we saw with e-commerce, the UN bodies have come up with these facilitation mechanisms, templates, etc., then the opportunity is going to be stunted. And so you might think today that if I just prioritize benefits for myself and don't care about these kind of facilitation mechanisms, I will corner more of the benefits. But the historical evidence is that, you need cooperation in certain areas around standards, around, mutual facilitation, recognition of different ways of doing things.
That's right. That's right. We forget the lessons of history very quickly, unfortunately, and then have to painfully learn them again. Is your sense that the global standards piece, right, as you mentioned, for AI safety, for, let's say, even auditability, especially as the technology proliferates, are you hopeful that global standards and global agreements on AI safety, etc., will actually come together Or is your sense that the economic and geopolitical competition will keep this process relatively slow, given sometimes the myopia that takes over, as you were referring?
I'm hopeful, specifically on standards. At the United Nations, we facilitate standards development. There is a triumvirate of international organizations, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, which is now 160 years old, started way back the days of the Titanic, with radio frequency related standards. And then you have ISO, IEC. They have, standing committees looking at standards. And you have other organizations like IEEE, SETS-NLEC, and others, who are working on standards. There is still space because, the field is growing. So you will see a multiplicity of standards. And we have suggested through the work of the high-level advisory body on AI that there should be a standards exchange, that kind of a marketplace for standards where the best standards win. And there's capacity building and greater understanding around the standards that work. So I think this is still in its early stages, but I'm hopeful that eventually we will sift through this complex landscape of standards, which is also proliferating in a sense, and come up with the right lessons that enable us to have common standards across different geographies.
Much like history is written by the victors, standards often end up getting written by the dominant economic players or the creators of the technology. Unfortunately, we've seen that standards will often also get geopoliticized. Countries or developers of technology will try and push their standards across as a way to maintain economic wealth and create moats. So how do you ensure that the voices of the others get a fair seat at the table?
Exactly. This is why, the idea of the AI standards exchange. And we had in December in Seoul, the first AI standards summit where some of these international organizations, the stakeholders around them came together to discuss the evolving landscape of AI standards. Ideally speaking, a standard should be tech neutral, business model neutral, and it should facilitate the business of companies, actors in that space in an equitable way. But then, if you've had a kind of a major hand in crafting those standards, the inner workings of it better than those who are at the periphery or outside, then it may create an advantage for you. So I think we have to avoid that risk by transparency measures, by more inclusive development of standards, and importantly, capacity building around standards. Because often I see that, if you look at forums like the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, where standards for the internet are being set, often you find that many countries, especially from the global south, don't have the expertise to participate in those discussions. So I think that's the first barrier that we need to break. And I've been very happy to learn. I participated in the program that ISO IEC recently did on AI standards, brought together practitioners from the global south. And I spoke to them. And there is this now attempt at capacity building around standards. And governments need to prioritize that, whether, in the case of India, for example, you have BIS and other NSOs, the National Standards Organization. So within those bodies, increasing the human resource that understands the evolving landscape of AI standards, participates actively, has travel budgets to go to these meetings. Simple things like that. I think it's important.
The other piece, of course, I want to now spend the next few minutes on USG Gill with you on is the other piece that you mentioned early on in your remarks, which is the growing divide. The growing digital divide, now the growing AI divide. In fact, in my book, The Great Tech Game that we were discussing very briefly earlier, I talk about how I foresee, and this is even before AI emerges as a mainstream technology on the global front, my fear and my expectation, unfortunately, has been that much like the industrial era drove the great divergence, that, many of us growing up in India or other parts of the global south have have been unfortunate receivers of this great divergence where countries like India and China, forming 20-30% of the global GDP, go down to single digits. You see countries developing much higher per capita GDPs than others. You see this great divide during the industrial era. There's some convergence that happens in the post-World War II era. But if you now see, given the concentration that you're also referring to of technological development, the wealth creation through that technological development that we've seen in the form of, let's say, Silicon Valley and the large multi-trillion-dollar companies that are now on the global landscape, both there in China and other places. Unfortunately, we're heading towards a second great divergence. AI doesn't seem to be necessarily positioned in a way that might reduce that divergence, but risks actually making it even more rapid, possibly. So I want to get your views on how you think the global South and the countries that are not necessarily at the cutting edge of tech innovation in AI, how can they start to think about this growing, I would say, global, geopolitical, social, economic issue, and what can they start to do about it?
Right. No, this is the biggest concern that we have at the United Nations, this concentration of economic and tech power and the hubris that comes with it, which sometimes, makes you do things that are risky. Because you think, no one else can match those. So I think we've seen that story before, but with AI, there is greater risk of that. In previous industrial revolutions, some simple things like, watchmaking, the clockmakers in Europe, that led to the development of machinery making, capital goods manufacturing, etc. So if you miss that, then, you were thrown back several generations. Similarly, the energy revolution, the coming of steam. If you miss that, you were behind, thrown back perhaps 50 years. We cannot afford to let that happen because this great divergence would not only be about, a divergence among countries, but it would be a divergence within countries.
Absolutely.
Even in high income countries, we may have great disruptions in terms of, white collar jobs, other impacts that this technology will bring. So winners and losers, it can't just be that they will stop at the borders, they'll be within your borders.
Well,
so
actually, in fact, if I may, one of the conclusions I even draw in my book is during the industrial capitalism era, pre-World War I era, similar hubris emerges, similar inequalities emerge within countries also, not just between, as you're rightly pointing out. And the result, if you can look at it from a big picture perspective, is the massive socio-political battles that happen in the form of communism, socialism as ideological battles with capitalism. And one can argue the Cold War is a result of that. Many can argue that World War II is a result of that.
And colonialism.
Colonialism, of course, is a massive implication of it. And so we cannot dismiss these inequality pieces within countries and amongst countries as purely an economic problem. It's really a socio-political problem, possibly a war-like situation can emerge. And so, of course, it's a very serious problem.
First and foremost, leaders. This means prime ministers, presidents, but also ministers and senior civil servants need to take this much more seriously. So, I'm very impressed whenever, I'm in a country and I find that leaders have found the time to sit down with AI experts and try and understand the technology. So I think that is the most essential step, that there is a whole of government, whole of society, societal leadership, not just the private sector, but university dons, ministers, senior civil servants who don't just dismiss it as a fad, but take it seriously and try and understand the technology. Not out of fear, not out of, hype, but in a very, very practical way as something that's going to change societies, economies, and even political systems and relationships. So that's step one. Two, I think there should be a massive focus on talent development. So at one level, it's skilling, AI literacy. And there it's interesting to see that if you look at the leading AI models, whether it's OpenAI's chatbots or others, the demographics of use. So many of the middle income, lower middle income countries, Brazil, Indonesia, India, the demographics of use are shifting that way. So in classrooms, we already have issues with education in the global south, quality of education. But I think if we can bring the literacy into the general population so that people are not scared of this technology and they understand both its power and its limitations. And then we need to facilitate access to the enablers of AI making, AI solution making, AI development for the private sector, for researchers, through compute, availability of the chips for training of AI models, through data related infrastructure so that you can run these models and so that you have enough data flowing through digital public infrastructures that modelers can access. So energy, again, you need to do energy in any case. You need to do renewable, non-fossil fuel energy. Now you have this additional requirement for AI. So you need to step up the effort on the energy structure. And then finally, I would say, there's the imperative of international cooperation and international solidarity. So recognizing that even from a kind of enlightened self-interest point of view, that if you help other countries develop absorptive capacity, then the size of the total addressable market is going to be, much, much more than what it would be if, only a few countries are in the AI race and others are just bystanders.
Yeah. But is your sense that countries that have sometimes much deeper problems, socioeconomic problems, as you were mentioning, lack of infrastructure, lack of education, lack of healthcare, especially countries in the global south, is your sense that the private sector has to lead this effort in those countries? So let's take Africa or South Asia as examples. Is your sense that this will have to be a government top-down driven, the way you were maybe suggesting that it's the leaders first that need to be prioritizing it? Is it going to be a more government-driven effort? Or is your sense that somehow it's the private sector that will have to step in, even if it's, companies that might traditionally been in industrial sectors, mining, telecom, etc., in these countries that might not be AI companies to begin with, that the effort will somehow have to be led by them in order for them to not remain bystanders. Otherwise, as we've been discussing in the colonial era also, most of the global south does end up becoming a market for the goods, but doesn't become active, let's say, beneficiaries of the wealth creation. So private sector driven or government driven?
Both. It's a reality in the global south that government actions matter. And the private sector may not have the capacity to kind of, let's say, buy compute on its own, build data centers on its own. I mean, in the Secretary General's report on innovative financing options for AI capacity building, we did an analysis, looked at different countries and divided them into 5 tiers, tier 0 to tier 4. Tier 0, tier 1 countries are not going to have access to market funding. Their companies are not strong enough to raise money, and the capital markets are not strong enough for that. So the government will have to step in. Philanthropic capital funding will have to step in. And there's not even a case for multilateral development bank loans. So that comes, once you have the capacity to repay. So there will be role for governments. And I think the initial kind of market for the private sector in terms of application may also need to come from the government. The digitalization of government services, the incorporation of AI chatbots into agriculture extension, for example. So the government will have to provide the kind of catalytic market opportunity for the private sector. But without the private sector, you cannot go anywhere beyond that. And your instinct is right. I think there are going to be AI native companies, and, they're going to disrupt the market in big ways. And recently I was writing a piece for Unido, so you can look at the AI native companies in more mature AI economies and try and copycat that. But then there are also, companies where in your own competitive advantage domains could be, resources. You mentioned mining or, plantations, coffee, cocoa, etc. So bringing AI into those areas so that you preserve your competitive advantage and build on it is also a smart strategy for governments who are not yet in the kind of, AI R&D development phase.
No, that's right. And, I'm starting to see, at least in the case of India, USG Gill, and I think in a few other countries, I've also seen this, that the traditional conglomerates or traditional large companies, the ones that were, let's say, building roads, are now starting to say, let's consider, or buildings, right, or commercial real estate, are now starting to say, let's build data set. Companies that were in mining of, let's say, traditional elements are starting to say, okay, rare earth elements seem to be the piece of the future of this, what I've called the great tech game in my book, that we need to be participating in. So there's a little bit of that crossover from whatever your traditional competitive advantage or industry was into a space that's more part of the AI ecosystem that I think I'm seeing in countries like India, and hopefully that is more widespread than just in India, so that even if you're not an AI native company, right, you're not a Microsoft or Google, etc., that you still find ways to participate in this economic opportunity at some point of that or some part of that ecosystem.
Indeed. And then there is another opportunity, which is, related to the ongoing digital transformation. So you remember the previous waves, the internet wave, then e-commerce and office applications. Then you had mobile, and then, data, the APIs opened up, data flows and data access. So in the case of a country that's emerging, developing country, you're dealing with the previous waves of digital transformation as well.
Exactly.
And now AI comes in. And so rather than think of this as a kind of, I leave those aside and deal with AI, I think bring AI into the previous waves of digital transformation. Speed up e-commerce, speed up the data side of the equation by leveraging AI rather than dealing with it piecemeal. Or just giving up and saying, let me keep focusing on internet connectivity because I will deal with AI later.
Correct.
Now do a combined approach.
Yeah. No, you have to see them as layers building upon each other, and you can't see them, unfortunately, as very distinct. Right? You've got to build, as you were saying, basic infrastructure capacity, internet capacity, digital literacy, and only then you might be able to succeed in AI. But then use AI to improve your digital literacy efforts. Exactly. So I think that's the interlocking of those layers that you have to think about. Are you seeing some examples for our listeners, USG Gill, of how countries, maybe some case where you've seen some of this play out very well, and certain countries or certain pockets really manage to do this well?
Yes, definitely. I see this in Southeast Asia. I see this in Africa, many parts of Africa. I also see this, in places like India. There is the infrastructure side. So the National AI Mission in India, is 40,000 odd GPUs being put together with government taking the lead, in a sense, subsidizing access to researchers, developers, smaller companies for the time being. And eventually, they grow strong enough to be on their own. And then I see this in Vietnam, other countries in ASEAN, where you have the development of context-specific, language-specific, agentic AI, which sits on, edge devices, which is more trusted by the population, etc. So a deeper tech view of AI as well, apart from, facilitating absorption. I see this in Africa in terms of, the push for infrastructure. Companies, for example, Masier's companies are bringing 13,000 GPUs to the 5 biggest data markets in Africa, realizing that, while you're building the telecom infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure, you also need to create the compute infrastructure because, you need to take this joined up view. So those are kind of encouraging. So the effort on data sets in Africa, civil society initiatives like Masakani and others where, language data sets are being curated and, some deep tech around it. I mean, there is this exciting company from Nigeria. Building a kind of a voice first AI approach rather than, text first LM type of an approach with these tonal languages like Yoruba. So those are kind of, hopeful signs that, the diffusion, democratization, the contextualization of these technologies, and also not looking so much at specific solutions, but because there's an infinite set of solutions. Possible.
Yeah.
And you can't say, I'll solve for cervical cancer or climate change resilient agriculture. The deeper enabling. And I see encouraging signs of this kind of focus. We need, of course, much more work, the cross-domain talent development, the infra work, the data sets work. But I think there are some good signs out.
Unfortunately, I think one of the key implications of the concentration of power and technological innovation in certain countries in the world, one of the deeper implications of it is the developers there or the founders there decide in many ways what they want the R&D dollars to be spent towards solving. So a very simple example is if it's being developed in the US and the US is short of talent or short of people, short of labor, it'll develop labor replacing technologies as the priority. In healthcare, if there's an effort to develop healthcare solutions on AI, the R&D dollars and the companies and the venture capital dollars, the federal funding will go into solving health problems that are endemic to that population. And unfortunately, as we very well know, the healthcare problems, the education problems, etc. in India will be very different. Our labor imperative as a large country as India is, with so many people to be provided structural sort of employment, is a very different view on technology. We don't want necessarily, I think in India, labor replacing technology, but I would say labor enhancing technologies. So when the agenda is being shaped by a few on where technology is heading, how do you really ensure that the applications in agriculture, education, healthcare, things like these are also emphasized enough in the solutions?
That's the importance of AI capacity building across the globe, because then, local entrepreneurs, local researchers can build their own solutions in context, so solve their own problems with their own solutions. I think so that there is a reason why it's one of the three pillars of our approach.
The capacity piece, yeah.
Equally important is, the governance piece, because, if everyone is not at the table, then obviously the risk of a few deciding the direction of investments, the direction of tech development is higher. Other pillar of the governance pillar, the policy pillar, that's so important. And then the correct understanding. If you don't have the right understanding of where the technology is headed, then you cannot place the right bets. So the science panel is so important in terms of, this reducing this information asymmetry between some who know where the technology is headed and most who don't know, so they're just guessing. There is still a lot of hype in terms of AI applications in education, health, etc. But a few areas are becoming very obvious, For instance, the acceleration of scientific discovery. It's a huge opportunity because one of the structural problems that you're dealing with in low-income, low-middle-income countries is the climb up the value chain in terms of S&T and innovation facilitated value creation. So if you can use AI to accelerate advance on science and technology, I think that is a great benefit. So that area needs to be prioritized. But these kind of understandings are sometimes, difficult to come to if you don't have this facilitation, kind of these neutral, independent sources.
Yeah. Let me now change tack and move towards the conversation on the India AI Impact Summit, which is coming up next month. I think a lot of the issues we've been talking about, whether it was the digital divide, the sustainability, which we haven't delved too deep into, but maybe we can. I think the capacity building, how do you make sure that AI diffusion happens rapidly as well? A lot of these are themes and pillars of the upcoming India AI Impact Summit. And having been, I think, an active shaper of the agenda, also USG Gill, let me ask you what your expectations are from the India Impact Summit. What are you hoping can come of both practical outcomes, but also, as you, I think, are emphasizing time and again, international cooperation and maybe even cooperation within the global south?
Right. So this is an important moment. The Secretary General would be leading the United Nations delegation. He'll be participating at the summit. He's been to every one of the previous summits, Bletchley Park, the Seoul Summit, which was a hybrid summit, and of course, Paris. Now, important moment also in the sense of the transition to this inclusive global dialogue on AI governance that happens in July at the United Nations in Geneva. We are very excited about the summit. It is the AI Impact Summit, so we are giving thought through the summit to the impact of AI. Mostly, I hope for good, but there are some areas where there are concerns, and one of the themes at the summit is the impact on children, children's well-being, children's mental health issues. I mentioned 2025, we've had a few unfortunate cases. And, we also need to look at some of the cognitive decline, the impact on social relationships, etc. We may get very excited about the economic impact, but not realizing that the ground may be shifting literally from underneath
the
feet. So it's exciting to see a comprehensive agenda, an optimistic agenda for the summit. It's exciting to see the focus on bridging the AI divide, building AI capacity. And as I said, the science panel is coming together. So this may actually happen by the time of the AI summit. So in a sense, the complementarity between the global pieces, global AI governance pieces, and some of these kind of, leaders-led initiatives is emerging through this summit. The preparations have been comprehensive, have been intensive under the 7 chakras, the 7 themes that have been adopted for the summit. And personally, I also like the focus on, let's say, making AI more accessible to the common person. So not keeping it abstract, but, relating this technology to, the person in the street who's struggling with different issues in life, from environmental pollution to jobs and incomes and other issues. So I think it's important that this is not just an abstract kind of a high-level policy discussion related to the impact on common people, on common citizens, involving them in a kind of a democratized approach to AI.
On the topic of sustainability, is your sense that the way currently AI technological development is happening, AI infrastructure development is happening, AI models are getting more and more energy hungry, right? You alluded to this issue earlier, this intersection of AI with sustainability. Are we at risk, USG Gill, of making the same mistakes that maybe we made with the industrial era, where we looked at the scale and the efficiency a lot?
Absolutely.
Of industries, but never thought about the energy impact or the ecological impact of the energy choices we are making? Is your sense that we are making some of the same mistakes today? And if so, where are you seeing maybe signs of possible solutions so that we don't end up making possibly the biggest mistake of all, which is of destroying our ecology?
Absolutely. So this is a very important risk alongside the societal implication that we discussed earlier. I mean, it's almost akin to the choice we made to go for the internal combustion engine.
Correct, exactly.
Back in the day, you could have gone with battery-powered cars and, taken a different approach. But we chose another path.
You went for the cheapest, correct. You went for the cheapest option offered
Right.
at the risk of what was maybe in the long run the best.
Right. So AI, it's compute intensive. So using it to kind of, do what previous, Web 1.0, Web 2.0 type business models have done, placing ads, etc., more addictive applications, I think that's a mistake from a kind of a broader public interest perspective. But if we are talking of scientific discovery, acceleration, some of the applications in, let's say, building climate change resilient agriculture, enhancing productivity there. And obviously then, those are kind of, better uses of AI. And also this heavy emphasis on large models
Correct.
that are very energy hungry, resource intensive. I don't know if that's a wise choice. You have SLMs, smaller models, more sustainable, that can do most of the jobs. So, I think we need to shift the emphasis. And then rather than a competitive development of models, we need more collaborative development of models. If we are going to develop the same AI 500 times over in different geographies because we are competing with each other, then, I don't think that's wise. So open source, shareable models, that collaborative team efforts to build data sets and, train models collaboratively. I think those are some ways in which we can reduce the print. But also we need to, as we build these data centers, these AI super factories, what kind of energy sources are we going to rely on? If we can use this excuse, it's like the oil shock of the 1970s, which led to a massive increase in nuclear power. If we can use this opportunity to also double down on renewable resources, increase the pace of development there, I think then we are going in a good direction. But if we take the easy pathway, I need the cheapest energy, then obviously we have.
I think that's a real issue of leadership, as you, I think, earlier also alluded to, that I think both the political leadership, but also the private sector leadership has to really have a little bit of the long-term vision driving them. Otherwise, we can very easily go into the abyss of, competition, much like the colonial powers did, back in the day, that I know that if I don't do it, the other one will, and hence let me just do what I can in the short term. I think that kind of competitive thinking often is not wise. USG Gill, let me move now into the last segment, which is a rapid fire segment, which we try and have a little bit of fun with after, I think, navigating a lot of very serious and very complex questions. So I'm going to quickly go through some rapid fire questions with you. And some are targeted at students, some are targeted at policymakers, and some might be a little bit more personal. So for students to begin with, we were talking about, Peck, you're a graduate of PEC in Chandigarh. So I'm going to flip the question and ask you, if you were talking today to a student at Peck, Punjab Engineering College, for those who might not be familiar, then how would you explain, rather, AI and the importance of AI to that student?
I would advise them to take to it without any fear or trepidation. Adopt it, research in their writing, in their project work. So don't hesitate, step forward. And I would also advise them to develop more of a cross-domain thinking lens, because engineers have their own hubris. They think the humanities types are kind of, not worth paying attention to. So they need to kind of, think about, because this is not just a tech for tech issue, it's the societal implication. Yes. So hang out with the, students from the medical college, or hang out with those who are studying law and political science. Try and understand how technology meets society, technology meets economics. So those are the two things that I would advise.
Which was going to be my second question. So you've stolen the thunder of my second question, but I'm still going to ask you. Now, let's say you were not talking to a student who's already picked engineering, but a student who's contemplating what to study what would you today advise them to study? And this question was coming exactly from the cross-domain point that you made. Would you rather that today, in a country like India, of course, we've seen engineering be preferred, or like law and medicine be the domains that, parents typically have pushed their children towards. But today, given the humanistic problems that AI is also, societal problems are not going to be solved by technology alone, what would you advise a student to study? Technology or non-tech domains? And you have to pick.
I'm going to not pick, because I think at the end of the day, you have to follow your heart. At the end of the day, tech is not going to disrupt passion. Tech is not going to take away, what makes your heart sing. So if it's poetry, go with poetry. If it is coding, go with coding. But don't follow, my uncle said so-and-so,
That's right.
or, I have a cousin who's making a ton of money in the tech sector and therefore I should do it. Do what you feel is, your kind of heart's desire. Sometimes it's not easy to find what your heart's desire. Sometimes you may have to do a little bit of experimentation, turning the dial on the radio till you hear the music, that kind of a thing. So again, don't be afraid to experiment. You may start on a career path and you realize, no, this is not. So flexible enough that, you can move into something else. And tech is going to disrupt jobs, careers, etc. But if you're good in what you do, if you're following your heart, I believe that the opportunity is going to be there. So, we heard about radiologists. You should stop training. We need more radiologists today.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be careful about picking winners in terms of, careers, and, just go for quality education.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I completely agree with you on that. And as someone who, went to a liberal arts college for my undergraduate and really experimented before, you find that, as you said, that right wavelength on which, the music starts to play for you. I think that's an absolute point for younger people to keep in mind. I'm going to now move on towards policymakers a little bit. What's more important for a policymaker today to emphasize, USG Gill? AI innovation or AI adoption and diffusion?
AI innovation.
Yeah,
I think adoption and diffusion, if you don't pay attention to AI innovation, then, diffusion would be kind of self-limiting.
No, great. I think that's a great point. Will AI create more jobs or displace more jobs?
My sense is that in the long run, AI will create more productive work, opportunities. So numbers, it's hard to predict. In some sectors, definitely the numbers are going to go down. So you may not need as many data analysts or coders at the entry level. Definitely that those numbers are going to change. But then, whoever is still doing that would use AI tools and be more productive and perhaps, upskill. So become a 5x, 10x coder engineer, as they say it. So again, it's the plus AI component. So whatever you're doing, if there's a way to bring AI into that, don't hesitate, experiment, do it. So that is the way. There's this study on LinkedIn that, if you look back, the careers of successful people, 80% of what they are doing today, the skills they are using today, didn't exist when they applied for the job. So they developed them over. And same is true with AI.
Yeah. And if anything, I think that trend will accelerate, right? I think the skills that we've learned will become obsolete very quickly. So we have to, in many ways, as I think many people say, learn how to learn and not just be set on certain skills. But 3 kinds of jobs that you think might become even more attractive over the next 5-10 years.
I don't know specific jobs, but I think 3 areas of expertise. So one obviously is related to emotional intelligence, understanding others, their motivations, working with that. I think this is not going to go away. AI is not going to be able to do that. In the foreseeable future, you cannot, unless we have a totally different paradigm of technology. So that, I think, That's one area. The second area is, creative thinking, structurally creative thinking, blue sky thinking, where, you somehow bring things together that you wouldn't have otherwise brought together. So this kind of a higher level, connection making.
Connecting the dots. Again, going back to, I think, your interdisciplinary cross-domain education point. Yeah, that's where the dots start to connect sometimes where you didn't think was possible.
This kind of an ability to, beyond the creative connecting the dots side, to bridge domains. So for like engineers to be able to work with medical data sets, to have an understanding of what a doctor deals with in terms of the shifting Bayesian probabilities in her head as a patient is walking in telling his story. So this kind of like curiosity about adjacent domains and being willing to, it's like a risk-taking ability in some ways. It's kind of courage to, step out of your comfort zone and go to another domain and find out what's going on there, and then, bring something back from that domain and so on. So I think these three areas connect the emotional intelligence, the passion side, the creative, blue sky thinking, connecting the dots kind of side. And then this, ability to step out of your comfort zone and be in other domains and, bring something back and then take something there. Those are kind of things that are, so if I'm hiring people, even for tech jobs, there is such a level of, achievement and competence in the technology itself. I'm going to look for other things like, is this person a self-starter? What kind of energy, enthusiasm? Can he or she work in a team? Can he understand, where to step in, where to step back, where to lead, where to follow? Those are the kind of things when you're hiring people, you look at. So Indian students in particular need to be careful about not getting bogged down in what is called ratta, like rote learning.
No, that's right.
AI is going to kill that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. As long as our exams and our question papers change, USG, if they stay the same, then I'm worried.
Can I say one more thing? This is not about technology, etc. But, human beings, we are embodied intelligence. So we move. We think in 3 dimensions. When we are writing, we are thinking very differently from when we are typing on the keyboard, because it's a different dimensionality in terms of, thinking and so on. So it's very important for students and children today to prioritize health, movement, stretching, some kind of physical activity, playing music, catching the ball, throwing the ball. And it's very disturbing. If you talk to school counselors, there's obviously the mental health issues, etc. But children today are not able to catch and throw balls as good as they used to earlier. And I think this is a mistake, because we are in for some cognitive decline if we are just going to engage with, knowledge through text, through screens, etc. Sitting down with people, running around, engaging with nature, moving our bodies. Those are the things. In terms of evolution, this is how human beings have learned. This is how, our intelligence is collective, embodied intelligence. It's not just sitting all here.
That's right. That's
around us. It's in other parts of the body as well. So I think this is the biggest lesson that we need to emphasize. Why is it that some tech villains are sending their children to schools where there are no devices?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. Which application of AI keeps you up at night?
I think it's the concentration of power. That's the one that I worry the most about, that, you have this divide between the architects of cognition and others who live in those architected spaces. I think this is also very dangerous for democracy, for human rights, for human agency.
Last couple of quick questions. We always end our podcast with USG Gill is recommendations of guests for our podcast that you think our viewers would benefit from, and from anywhere in the world really, and books maybe that you would recommend also.
I've enjoyed reading, Anil Ananthaswamy's book, The Elegant Math Behind Machine Learning. It's an enjoyable read. There's an earlier book by Kentaro Toyama, The Geek Heresy, which is about, this engineering hubris. And then, it breaks down in front of this messy reality of development.
Yeah.
So again, something I can recommend to your listeners. There are so many exciting guests, but I think it's important that we don't allow the tech conversations to happen only with and among techies.
Yes.
It's important to bring poets, philosophers, ethicists and others into the conversation. And you have some great examples. It's also important, I think, to have younger voices and, women and girls more prominently in the tech space. I think in many areas, if you look back, if we had involved women in the development of those technologies, those applications, I think today the shape of those technologies would have been very different.
Oh, absolutely. They'd look very, very different. Very, very different. Look a bit hopefully that towards the future, that I think hopefully we'll have a much better mix of people, young, older, women, men, philosophers, ethicists, and of course tech people in the room. But thank you so much, USG Gill. This has been a fascinating discussion. I think you've covered lots and lots of things. I would have loved to spend more time with you on each, but thank you for being very, very candid, I think, and very thoughtful about all the pieces that you work on and that you've shared with us today. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at the summit.